Well, there were some big events that took place over the weekend. And of course, there was a lot of thinking that if we saw an attack on Iran, it would lead to a big spike in oil prices, cratering the markets. And we've seen just the opposite. The stock market has now rallied. The stock market has now seen a fairly large rally and oil prices have tanked. So, a counterintuitive response, there's some reasons for that. And we're going to dive into a number of fascinating details about this situation with Christian Takushi, is a geopolitical strategist and Swiss macroeconomist. The website is geopoliticalresearch.com, where you can follow all of his research and work. And Christian, normally we're connecting with you. You are in Switzerland, but I understand that you are currently in Uruguay.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you for having me back. Uruguay currently placed number one on our geopolitical safety list. Yeah.
And I guess to say it as they say it, the natives there, it's Uruguay.
Yes, they say like that. Yeah. I
It's
think
not
you're.
you're if you're American, you say Uruguay. If you're actually a native, you say Uruguay.
Yeah, but I think both ways go. There are a lot of Americans here lately. A lot of people from the United States, Canada, and Europe, even other parts of the world like Australia, coming to Uruguay, looking for geopolitical safety.
Yeah, and that's something that you've spoken with us on the past a number of different times on your geopolitical ranking list, where certain countries are situated on that. And of course, New Zealand is often thought of as being a geopolitical safe haven. But as you have mentioned with us, Uruguay is increasingly at the top of the list there.
Yes, yes, but other countries too, like Singapore, that is climbing up, the ladder, you could say, and places like also, some, islands like Mauritius, there are coming up. Uh, but even outside of the top five or the top 10, there are countries that are moving up, like Paraguay, right? So, yeah, there's quite a lot of action. But one thing is clear: countries in the global south are moving up in this ranking.
And I think it's important to point out that, as we've been speaking with you over the years, the world is obviously becoming increasingly unstable, geopolitically wise, much more multipolar, as you see countries like China, the global south, starting to increase in their trade relationships, their alliances, the US becoming less dominant and more inward focusing. And so these very large institutions, asset managers, wealthy, they're looking for places, safe havens, either as a base of operations or as to have a second residence. And, as you've pointed out to us, Uruguay is increasingly at the top of the list for many people's research. And a lot of that has to go with the research that you've been providing these institutions and high net worth investors as well.
Yeah, yes. It is happening actually. A lot of wealthy people had focused too much on tax optimization, and the glamour, of course, that goes with it. Look at places like Dubai, right? Very low taxes and a very nice lifestyle, glamour, and um, and they were following things like the peace index. Yeah, it's safe to walk there, places like Riyadh, or Qatar. But geopolitical safety is something that has caught people by surprise. They were not paying attention to it. Geopolitical safety is actually more related to your country being exposed to war or military action. And when it comes down to it, I think people are realizing they have been ill-advised. And yeah, a lot of people are now scrambling and resetting, their um, their property allocation, their portfolio diversification, and even where do they have their families.
Now, Christian, I definitely want to get your take on what we saw happen over the weekend and the market response. But before I do that, I'd just like to dive in a little bit more on Uruguay, since you are there presently and you are very familiar with the country, you've been following it, you've been visiting there. What sort of changes have you seen there as, again, as we're talking about, these large institutions, asset managers, the wealthy increasingly seeing this place as a safe haven? I mean, are you seeing that reflected as you're visiting there right now?
Yeah, a lot of people are coming and testing the waters, checking the place out, checking it out, and only a minority have made a commitment to move here, to move assets, to purchase land, etc. And I think it is reasonable to do it that way. You don't just jump the boat and come here. But a lot of people are coming to figure out to discover the country. They realize this is a de facto neutral country. They're also a very experienced buffer state between two big powers, Argentina and Brazil. Good relations with everyone. They have a deep port. It's very important. A lot of water, abundance of clean water, excellent air, and a lot of food. They have excellent meat. But the most important thing, and I think what makes this country special, is stability. They've found a way to be stable. There was recently, no, last year, there were elections. A conservative government was actually sent back home, you could say. Uh, a central left government was elected, but not much has changed. And that's really interesting. I was here during the elections and I saw, it's hard to believe, that the supporters of both parties are helping each other with water and food on the streets. You don't see that in the United States. And and yes, a center-left government has now replaced a center-right government, but they talk to one another. So there is a certain degree of civility that they exercise here that is unheard of in the rest of Latin America and, yeah, the Western world for that matter.
So, Christian, let's jump into what we saw over the weekend with Iran. Of course, we saw the strikes take place on the nuclear facilities. There's some open questions here. Of course, you've got a little bit of a contrarian take, and you also bring with it a European perspective, which I really appreciated, that doesn't necessarily conform to some of the narratives that are popularly discussed in the media. Tell us, big picture, what's your take about what we saw and especially the market response as well?
Uh, for once, the markets got it right. Chris, the markets are spot on. I completely agree with the markets and with this rally. I think this time the markets were getting this better than or more accurately than analysts, and surely political analysts, geopolitical analysts. I think the markets are right in celebrating this, and I think that there might be even more to come.
Okay. Now, what was it exactly that you think the market got right here in this case?
I think the market saw that after 2.5 years of wars, 3 years of wars, something happened, shifted when Israel started to attack Iran. Israel was attacked viciously on October 7th, yeah, 2023, and Israel had to fight two front war, three front war against Hamas, Hezbollah, etc., the Houthis, also against elements in Syria. But the fact is that when Israel went for the head, as they said, we're going to go for the head of the snake. When Israel started to deal with the source of their problem, Iran, um, markets noticed a change in posture in Europe and the United States. Um, and they noticed how nervous European leaders responded to it. And our European leaders went an extra mile to make sure that I would word this very carefully. I would say our European leaders immediately went on. We have to stabilize the situation. There cannot be any regime change in Tehran. And you saw how President Trump also took that very seriously and also actually acted, I would say, on behalf of Europe, making sure that the wish of European leaders is translated into action, that the regime is not changed. And as the days pass, markets can see that. Markets can also read through. Markets know that we are in times of war, that not everything can be said. So governments have a narrative. And the markets know, investors are not naive. They know that the official narrative has to be the official narrative. We are now in a global conflict, you could say, or competition or conflagration, economic war. You can choose the definition that best suits your viewpoint. But markets know that we are in a kind of very serious global competition. So not everything can be said, and they can read through the headlines, they can read through the news, and they could see this is now entering the stage of a managed war. The moment Iran and Israel began to shoot at each other, uh, you know, it it looked like it is escalating, getting out of control, but there were elements of a managed war, and especially when President Trump went in. And so President Trump, I believe, has shown that he can intervene. He used maximum force, but without actually hurting the regime, without throwing out the regime, which was the demand of Europe, and is now established let's put it this way, a temporary ceasefire. And I think people are cheerful. Markets are cheerful
Yeah.
because President Trump promised he would bring peace through strength. It has not worked yet in Europe, but now in the Middle East, it has worked. And I think investors are right to say, this is it. You know, we got a first case of precedent where the United States is bringing peace through strength and even rebuking an ally like Israel. This is what we want. And now they have like a template or hopefully Ukraine and other parts of the world. I think that this is a moment of elation, positive sentiment in the markets. I think for the first time in 2 3 years, markets see uh, the end of the wars. It is at least I feel what the markets see.
Mm. Yeah, and just to be clear, so we are speaking on Tuesday, June 24th, and so the Iranian strikes obviously happened over the weekend. The day following, or let's say the trading day following on Monday, it was a bit volatile, but markets ended up eking out a gain, and oil prices fell. And on the day that you and I are speaking, the S&P 500 and global markets more broadly are up strongly with the ceasefire announcement, which, like you said, is bringing a lot of elation. And so, as you say, this is a managed war at present. It's not an out of control escalation. And some would say that on a very surface level, this is an example of buy the rumor, sell the news, where, there was expectations for some type of larger regional war or escalation in the Middle East between Israel and Iran. We're all building up to that. And the thinking was at least there was pricing into the market, whether or not that was on oil or on the level of risk to the stock market. There was a pricing in of major escalation, a regional or global war, potential use, who knows, of nuclear weapons. This closing of the Strait of Hormuz would be also something that could obviously cause a major disruption. All sorts of different things that could come out of that. And instead, what we saw following the strikes, as we're speaking right now, is a ceasefire deal and none of those worst case scenarios. So, like you said, the market got it right with the way that it's responded because it is very managed. Can you tell us a little bit more about that in terms of the way in which you see it successfully being managed? Of course, there are a lot of open questions on and things to be determined on how things will proceed in the coming days, if that ceasefire will be held to. And there's already been elements of signs on each side that perhaps that is a very tenuous ceasefire. But what are some of the elements that you see that are managed, let's say, either by Iran, Israel, or the U.S.?
Well, it is managed in two senses. Europe cannot risk the fall of the regime in Tehran. And on the other hand, we have now a very strong president in the United States, in Washington, that wants to keep the United States out of forever wars, but doesn't rule out maximum force or strength, show strength in order to preempt a war or to stop a war so that it doesn't get bigger or worse, sucking in the United States later on. So I think that you have a very strong posture from the United States and also a very cautious, I don't want to say fearful, but very, very cautious Europe, very worried about the possible fall of the regime in Tehran. When you put these two together, you get you get really already the main pieces of the puzzle that we have now. We came close to a very bad situation. The people that were calling out a massive rise of oil to $130 were not naive. They were not stupid. They did it on very good grounds. So we should not laugh at the analysts that were saying this could get worse. I think without this bold intervention of President Trump, we would be there, absolutely there, and we would be going through 110 oil price at the moment because Israel would have had to go after those sites with the forces that they have. It would have been with a lot of losses, and so the losses would be mounting on both sides. By using the B-2s, the United States actually preempted Israel and actually puts actually both countries under pressure to come to terms with with one another and do a temporary ceasefire. Israel can say we have taken those sites out. The Iranians can say, well, maybe we took our enriched material just out of just 1 or 2 days before there were bombs, so we haven't lost completely. You know what I mean?
Well, they did,
Both,
right? I mean,
yeah,
that's what the satellite footage and reports are saying is that Iran was able to move out its enriched uranium due to the surveillance. So they obviously knew ahead of time that this was going to happen.
yeah. But I believe also that President Trump allowed, I mean, we cannot rule out that President Trump allowed the Iranians to win a little here, just a devastating win for, just a devastating blow for Iran and a huge win for Israel would have not brought the immediate peace that the US wants at the moment. Uh, I think I think President Trump had to let the Iranians have something. You know what I mean? At least those centrifuges are gone. Well, at least, well, not the centrifuges. Maybe they took out the centrifuges and enriched material, but at least those sites that take years in building, have been taken out. You understand? So I think um, there is here an element of strategic victory for Israel, but there is also very clear elements of tactical victory for Tehran. Not just maybe, I mean, we cannot be sure, but maybe safeguarding part of the centrifuges and the enriched material, and most of all, safeguarding their regime. The Ayatollahs are in place, right? And at the same time, Europe has what it wanted. Don't touch the Ayatollah, right? Don't. And I think there's a reason for that too. Why all this is managed? Um, I believe that Iran has uh, improved its mid-range advanced ballistic missiles quite a lot in the last 10 years. Surely thanks also to the Obama, U.S.-Iran deal that slowed down the enrichment of, material in exchange for Iran continuing its ballistic missile program. So that ballistic missile program was de facto, you could say, shielded from further action or embargo. And Iran has advanced probably more than what we thought they could have advanced. Their missiles have extended their reach significantly. They used to be at 2,000 kilometers, reach. I mean, we are telling the world for more than 20 years Iranian missiles reach up to 2,000 kilometers. I mean, we have to be honest. In the last 20 years, the Iranians have made huge progress. In my view, they reach now 3,400 kilometers. that doesn't reach Paris or London, but it is enough to reach Berlin, Geneva, Marseille, and surely Rome. So parts of Western Europe are, in my analysis, probably already within the reach of the improved ballistic missiles of Iran. And what is worse is we know now that Iran has hypersonic capabilities. uh, Israel has knowingly probably the best missile defense shield in the world. It couldn't stop the hypersonic missiles of the Iranians. And I think that actually, when the Iranians were launching those missiles, and the Iranians are very careful never to show too much. The Iranians never use all their weapons. They only use what they really, really have to show. Iran is extremely intelligent in that sense. They always keep the long view when they go to war. And when they launched those hypersonic missiles, which they didn't do on the first day of the war, when they launched them, they were launched not just for Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, they were launched for European capitals so that our European leaders would see, look, what we're capable to do. Do you want to know? Do you want to test how far our missiles can reach? So I believe that there was that was also Iran helped us make this a managed war too. You know what I mean? So I think all involved, even Israel. Israel gave the United States time to intervene if they wanted to. So everybody here, even Bibi Netanyahu, moved into, hey, let's manage this. You know, the Europeans, Netanyahu, the Ayatollah, even the Revolutionary Guard through their speakers, they were more or less conciliatory, I would say. They were giving us some hints, and of course, Washington. So I think that the markets sense that they sense these kind of things, and that's why some people went on to uh, you know, um, um, testing the waters and going long rather than short. This is, I would say, it is quite an amazing weekend for investors, and I think this is a situation where everybody can claim a degree of victory, even Europe.
Yeah, yeah, and even with Iran's response, right? They can say, "Well, we retaliated against Israel by bombing Israel in retaliation. We also attempted to bomb U.S. bases in the Middle East as well. So we did our part. The U.S. did its part by finally taking action with Israel. But as you're saying, this managed war, it's not an out of control escalation, which would be worst case scenario. This managed war, it sounds like there were some calculated agreements, as you see it, to make this strike on the nuclear facilities to set Iran back. But at the same time, somehow Iran also had this information ahead of time, multiple sources confirming that it looks like Iran was able to move its enriched uranium out of those areas prior to the strikes. So the infrastructure was attacked, but not the actual material that would be needed to build the bomb. They were able to, according to these reports, move that. Um, so it sounds like, it was very much managed by the way that you're discussing this.
Yes, but we have to be careful. Some people are portraying this as a stage war, right? And we have to be
Mm,
careful. That was not a stage war. It's not like President Trump told them, you got 2 more days, then we strike. No, this was a hot war. It was going dangerous. It was escalating. And I think that we have to give credit to all involved. I mean, to Jerusalem, even Tehran, Washington, and also President Macron, and also Prime Minister Keir Starmer. I think they all help dissuade the situation, bring this into a situation where everyone could win something, claim some victory. Some people that are, good at propagating conspiracy theories are saying this was a stage war. Look at the
right.
market. Markets are proving us right. No, I
Yeah.
think
You're not saying that.
this was a hot war that we were able to manage. We were able to manage this war, and it ended I believe the last 10 days were a managed war, very clearly a managed war. But managed war doesn't have to be negative. There is some sense, the Ayatollahs don't want to end their rule either. They care about their rule, and uh, we think that it's not the first time that European leaders have been very worried about the Ayatollahs falling, the regime in Iran falling. You remember during the Arab Spring, we helped the revolution, the Arab Spring, and the revolution of students in every Middle Eastern, North African country. We even helped them with intelligence, you could say, with our NGOs. We even helped militarily. We bombed the dictators. But when the revolution reached Iran, we were very cautious. Iranian students claim actually we let them down. That's their version, but we surely did not help them. And yeah, the Tehran regime crushed the student revolt, the Arab Spring Revolution there brutally. But you could already see back in those days of the Arab Spring, the late Arab Spring, that our European leaders were much more cautious about the regime in Tehran falling than the regime, let's say, in Libya or Tunisia falling or Egypt falling. They couldn't care less. They say, go ahead, guys. We can even help you if you want. But Tehran is something different. Tehran is something different. This is a country that has vowed to destroy the state of Israel in a way like this. If we go down, Israel goes down with us, and potentially Europe. They have actually at times said we will not hesitate in using our weapons against Europe if needed be, right? So they have warned and threatened Israel and the West before, not just the United States. And I think the European leaders acted correctly in trying to stabilize the situation. I don't think that our European leaders are keen to. I don't think they are keen to figure out how far the Iranian ballistic missiles reach. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think our official line is they reach 2,000 kilometers. We're saying this for many years, and we know that it's probably no longer the case. And they're probably surely they're not there at 4,000 kilometers yet. They're not. But somewhere in between they are. My guess is 3,400 kilometers. That's serious enough. That puts Rome and Berlin, Geneva, in potential reach of the more advanced Iranian missiles. I don't think they have so many of those that reach over 3,000 kilometers, but they will probably reserve those for such an act, right? In case they are facing existential threat where they know they're being taken out that day. This is a serious concern for Europe that in the day that the Iranian leadership believes they're being taken out and they're going down, they will not go down alone. And unfortunately, the Tehran regime has so many times threatened, the state of Israel, obliterating it, that our European leaders cannot take second chances. So I think that um, a lot of leaders show some common sense in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, these are really good insights. And so when we're talking about this being a managed war, there was a calculated agreement that was made either implicitly or explicitly between the players involved that a major strike would be made on Iran's nuclear facilities, but not one that would attempt to enact regime change in Iran. And I think that that's the key is that there was somehow indicated to Iran, we're not going to try to overthrow you as a regime because that would lead to, in that case, if Iran felt that it was now at risk of at an existential risk, then in that case, what it would do is it would react by either closing the Strait of Hormuz, leading to a wider regional global war, or worst case scenario, part of that worst case scenario would be, like you're saying, using its own ballistic missiles to strike targets in Europe as a potential. So that's where the managed, calculated nature of this came about, where somehow Iran knew we're not looking at an existential overthrow. We do not need to react in this way. Instead, what we can do is we can retaliate on Israel the way we did. We can retaliate by firing missiles at a US base, even though there's no casualties. And that's why the market responded the way it did, because the worst case scenario is basically off the table. Would you say that's kind of a fair characterization of the events that we saw?
It is, I think, I agree partially with it. It is, I think what you share is the overlap of three scenarios, and I think they're valid. Our personal, main scenario is slightly different, but I think that what you've shared could possibly be the case. So we should not rule it out. But in any way, I think what you shared is probably not far away from what really transpired. We have to stress here that Israel didn't get all it wanted. For Israel, this is just a postponement of a war. Iran has the money. Iran has still enriched uranium, probably, or plutonium, and Iran has also a lot of cash to purchase enriched material of the black market, or especially from Pakistan, for instance, right? They share a border, and Pakistan is ready to enter, or Pakistan was ready to enter this conflict if necessary,
Mm.
on behalf of Iran. Both countries are increasingly aligned with one another, and Pakistan is a major nuclear power. So I think that there are risks left for Israel. Israel didn't get all it wanted, but in a way, Washington, I mean President Trump, did heed the request of Europe. And I think President Trump could have also taken this out very quickly in the first week of the conflict, the first 2 or 3 days of the conflict. But the aftermath could have been difficult or devastating for Europe. And I think that Washington has done a lot in the last 2 weeks to protect Europe. I don't know if Europeans appreciate that or even are aware of that, but I think that top European leaders have access to certain military intelligence, and I think that they do appreciate that. I think you will see President Trump being welcome in Europe like never before, like never before.
Mm.
Of course, European leaders have spoken very badly about Trump, and they cannot do a complete turnaround. They would lose political credit in Europe if they do so. Some of them have built their careers by, speaking badly about President Trump, but I don't think they will be able to hide their gratefulness. European leaders will surely show gratitude to President Trump for what he's done to preempt Israel, and in a way uh, that the United States safeguarded, security over Europe. I think this plays very well also into President Trump's hands or cards. He's coming to a very important NATO summit, wanting European countries to pay up, the dues, or to invest 5% of their GDP in defense, which I think will will be achieved. And President Trump's trade policies didn't work as expected. They were partially successful, but not as successful as his commerce secretary had hoped. And the commercial trade war of President Trump somehow backfired too. So although it reached some goals, it also backfired. The West is now less than 50% of the world economy. We are not the majority now. Not long ago, the Western countries made up 80% of the world economy. We've come a long way from that. And I think that President Trump was probably a little bit ill-advised. He lost some capital there. Countries like Brazil, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, they didn't go along with us. They basically said, we go with the US, we go with Russia, we go with India, we go with China, we want to deal with everyone. So that didn't work. And President Trump needed to, to start working with Europe again. So because of the, I would say, partially failed aggressive trade policies, President Trump needed again to win, support of Europe, and this is ideal. So I think this is being in a way a very lucky month for President Trump.
Mm. Now, I want to go back to something you said in terms of a number of the players here and some of the agreements that were made, but also the fact that Israel didn't get what it wanted. Israel has openly stated, Benjamin Netanyahu and many of the leadership in Israel have said that they would like to see the Iranian regime overthrown. For obvious reasons, Iran has spoken very openly about believing that Israel is a terrorist state, that it does not have the right to exist, and they had the clock, I believe is the doomsday clock that was in the square. I'm not sure what the exact square, the name of the square, but I believe it's in Tehran, where they would show the countdown for when Israel will be wiped off the face of the map by 2040, I think is when it would go down to zero. By the way, we should point out Israel did target that clock. And apparently, in the recent strikes, that was taken out. So we'll have to see. But apparently, that clock no longer exists after this weekend. But like you're saying, Israel would like to see regime change in Iran. Um, Many in the U.S. would like to see that as well. But doing that, if Iran feels like it has some type of existential threat and that was actually being pursued, which was not being pursued this weekend, but if they felt that that was being pursued, they could very easily retaliate and lead to a much wider escalation. We did not see that. Markets are responding because we're not seeing that worst case scenario. However, it is interesting because along the lines of Israel, Israel did show that it was able to, through this Project Narnia, able to precisely target a large number of Iranian nuclear scientists and engineers. I think the number is between 9 and 12. While they were sleeping in their beds, they felt that they were completely safe. And yet, through some type of technology, we don't know yet whether or not these were very small drones that could fly in a window and detonate a bomb. We've all seen those videos of how that could be done, or through other means. Israel has shown that it has the ability to precisely strike individuals when they're sleeping in the safety of their beds in Iran. So, I mean, ostensibly, if Israel were able to do that for a larger number of the Iranian leadership, I mean, you could see it facilitating regime change through a method of this type. So I think these are some of the things when we're talking about this ceasefire that is currently underway. This is a very fluid situation. Each player, whether or not that is the US or if it's Iran or if it's Israel, even Europe, each have various types of scenarios that they're considering, risk reward assessments, right? So it is a tenuous situation, and we shouldn't expect that this ceasefire is necessarily going to hold moving forward, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we have to be aware that there is a war coming in the Middle East, a large-scale war that will not be managed. Such a war is coming, and we are in a kind of interlude, prelude. You can choose a different word if you want, but this is not the big war in the Middle East that we've been expecting. The one is still ahead of us, and but President Trump has intervened. He's earned us some time, and I hope that we use that time wisely. The world is actually the world has entered a very difficult period. Western nations, the large Western nations, are technically or de facto bankrupt. They just simply keep in big printing money and rigging markets, fixing markets, fixing volatility. We can do it, yes. And we can do it because every major stakeholder is sitting in the same boat, whether retirees, government, pensions, financial media, everyone is in the sitting in the same boat. But no one wants to even imagine uh, the cost of asset prices imploding. But for 49 years, for 50 years, basically, we have been inflating asset prices, the prices of everything. And is that real wealth? So we're very proud of the size of our GDPs, but we have a problem in the West. And at the same time, we have been underestimating growing geopolitical frictions and conflicts. We are entering a period where those two main phenomena are converging. And normally in human history, those convergences don't end easily, they don't end well. Something has to give, something has to give. Will Western countries declare bankruptcy? I don't think so. So the other options that are either war or a massive change in the system. And I believe it's probably a combination of the last two: wars and massive system change, reset, but not just monetary, financial, political, geopolitical reset. And I think that's the big picture. And we have to keep that in mind. The big picture is what really matters here.
And I guess that brings us full circle to as we started discussing at the very beginning as to why you are in Ponta de Este right now in Uruguay, right? I mean, the world is increasingly becoming more and more geopolitically unstable. Obviously, we see, the wars that are happening as we're speaking in the Middle East. There is the large amount of competition that's taking place between US and China. Obviously, the Russia-Ukraine war, which is still ongoing. So there's a number of hotspots around the globe that are either active, and then there's also ones that are brewing under the surface as well. I know you follow a lot of these, you track them.
Yeah.
If you would mind, tell us, Christian, but as we close out today's show, some of the various big picture that you're tracking globally when it comes to this. I believe you told us in the past there's about 100 or so.
Yeah, we have now counting 122 conflicts um, across the northern hemisphere alone. 122, and we have 5 conflicts in the southern hemisphere.
Yeah,
And
that's a lot.
the ones that are very likely going to ignite into real open hostilities and warfare are all in the northern hemisphere. I expect still in the coming years 3 to 4 large-scale wars. I mean, total wars, not managed wars. And one or two of them will see the deployment of nuclear weapons, probably tactical nuclear weapons. I know people say nuclear weapons will never be used because that's the end of mankind. Unfortunately, it's not the case. Technology has made it possible that nuclear weapons can be used with limited destruction. But nevertheless, terrible consequences of the partial use of nuclear weapons. Um, this is what is coming to humanity, what humanity is facing, and but that's actually not surprising, right? It's now more than 50, 60 years that we haven't addressed one single crisis. We just kick the can down the road, print money. It's sad, but that's what the West is doing. And we used to have a high moral ground. We used to teach the rest of the world how to save, how to invest, how to manage fiscal finances responsibly. Now, even the most well-behaved Western nation, which used to be Germany, the most frugal Western nation, was found out rigging the numbers, by its own constitutional court uh, or Supreme Court, you could say. So um, the West has experienced a moral bankruptcy, you could say, that has led to a monetary um, uh, phenomenon full of bubbles. So our economies are bubble economies. and they're being driven by credit and debt and money printing and government spending money that they don't have, you know. So, I mean, these things sound very theoretical, but for your listeners or viewers just to have a concrete picture, just the investments needed for net zero in Europe, just net zero projects. It needs financing. This is going to cost Europe some 35 trillion US dollar. 35 trillion US dollar. Money that Europe obviously doesn't have. Okay? Doesn't have. So just give you a small example. That's the equivalent of all private assets, savings, and pensions in Europe. Okay, so just for you to see the amount of money that Europe still needs to find, to move ahead. And this is not even including the rebuilding of Ukraine and the rebuilding our militaries. Okay, so something's got to give, and I think that the Western world faces a gigantic task, and it explains why so many countries out there in emerging markets that have healthy fiscal finances and healthy, monetary policies are trying to delink a little bit from the West. They're trying to we think that they are embracing China. No, they're not embracing China. They are de-risking. They are actually trying to hedge themselves against the financial collapse of the West, the collapse of our bubbles. And these countries, in an effort to hedge themselves, are reducing, maybe business, portfolio exposure, currency exposure to us, and trying to do more business with China. And not necessarily because they love China, but because of de-risking. We have become the main source of risk, and I think this is something that people need to understand.
Well, I couldn't agree with that more. And again, I want to note the website, geopoliticalresearch.com, is where you can find more of Christian's work and analysis, in addition to on our podcast, where we have the pleasure of speaking with you, Christian, on occasion. I know you're also interviewed by the CFA Society in Switzerland and elsewhere. You give presentations all over the globe on your geopolitical analysis and outlook. You've made a number of really good calls over the years in terms of assessing various scenarios and correctly calling them beforehand. So it's always a pleasure to get your insights, especially from a non-US perspective, and specifically one that is looking at things very objectively. When we think about the various players involved, each of their motivations, some of the agreements or back channel communication that may be happening either explicitly or implicitly to lead to the scenarios that we see. So it's a very interesting inside view how things unfold geopolitically speaking. So as we close, Christian, would you mind tell our listeners a little bit more about geopolitical research and some of the information that you offer there?
Thank you. Well, information posted on our website is only partial and delayed, truncated for obvious reasons. People that would like to read our reports instantly in its fullness, they can subscribe, but that's also on the website. Thank you.
And I'll also have a link out to our prior interviews on Uruguay, how it's situated as a geopolitically safe region of the globe, and provide more information on that. So you definitely want to listen to some of those prior interviews that we've done with Christian in the past. Christian, always a pleasure to have you on. Wish you all the best, and we look forward to speaking with you again in the future.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, you want me to go ahead and stop recording?
It was good, I think.